Hello and welcome back to Our Story, 250 Years of the United States of America. Today, we step into 1777, a year of struggle, endurance, and transformation in the American Revolution. If this is your first time hearing the show, make sure you go check out the 1776 episode, as it is not only the basis for understanding the revolution that is now taking place, but is the most pivotal year in our history. If you are returning to the show, please do me a favor and share this show with everyone you know, and if able, go ahead and like the show wherever you're hearing it. That way we can get the word out to more people and share our story with as many Americans as possible in time for our 250th anniversary. Now let's get into the episode. The newly declared free and United States fight on for independence, but the road is treacherous. Optimistic patriots glimpse hope, yet all feel the war's toll. Heavy casualties, scarce supplies, and an uncertain future all weigh on this young nation. Changes made to our system of government in this year still affect us today, and the American people carve out for themselves a national identity unified under a new banner. Welcome to 1777 in America. It's New Year's Day in the United States of America, and Robert Morris, a key American naval leader, writes to George Washington and says, "The year 1776 is over. I am heartily glad of it, and hope you nor America will ever be plagued with such another. Let us accept the success at Trenton as a presage of future fortunate events, and under that impression, I do most sincerely wish you a successful campaign in 1777 to crown you with immortal honors in reward of the dangers and fatigues of war, and that you may, for many, many years after, enjoy the sweets of peace and domestic happiness in reward of your social virtues." Despite the hope shared by many supportive of the cause, civilians across the 13 states face wartime shortages. Families ration flour, salt, and firewood, and are deciding whether to slaughter livestock now, though an inopportune time, or risk losing it to foraging armies. It's worth noting here that while the exact figures are somewhat questioned, 1/3 of Americans remain neutral in the conflict. 1/3 are clinging to their loyalist leanings, and 1/3 support the move towards independence. About 3% of the entire population is serving or will serve in Washington's army over the course of this war, meaning that roughly 1 of 10 to 1 of 12 people supportive of the movement will eventually take up arms. In New Jersey, General George Washington's weathered army recovers from their brutal winter campaign, while British Major General Charles Cornwallis marches from New York with 6,000 regulars arriving in Trenton on January 2nd, after hearing of the Patriots' success in battling the unprepared Hessians. Washington's forces have withdrawn south behind Assunpink Creek, boxed in by the Delaware. Cornwallis delays his attack until dawn, expecting an easy win against the cornered Patriots. But by night, Washington's men slip away, leaving campfires burning to mislead the British into thinking their position has not changed. They split into 2 columns, circling south and east respectively around Cornwallis' flanks. By morning, they safely reach Princeton. At Princeton, Washington's 5,200 men face Colonel Charles Mawhood's 1,200 regulars as they're leaving to join Cornwallis. In this unexpected 45-minute clash, the Americans lose 30 men, either killed or wounded, while inflicting a total of 500 losses, 100 dead, 300 wounded, 100 captured, to Mawhood's force, which flees towards Trenton and New Brunswick in disarray. Washington marches north to Morristown, where, at least for the moment, they find relief. Wooded hills surrounding their Morristown camp shield this winter headquarters from the elements and provide some concealment from the British. These cunning moves, and ones like it, of shifting large groups of men silently and at unexpected times, intentionally misleading the enemy, and knowing when to retreat, make Washington's small army seem larger than it is. These are early guerrilla warfare tactics being used against a much more established force. For many Americans, the motivations to fight hard and win the day are held more deeply than for the British. To these untrained and often unfunded Americans, this is an existential fight, yet the Continental Army remains fragile. Thousands have quit after enlistments expired December 31st of last year, and this winter of 1777 is considered the low point for Washington's army. And with fewer than 5,000 men in the fight, the odds remain seemingly insurmountable. Many lack shoes, stockings, and coats, and resort to wrapping their feet in burlap. Poorer yet sympathetic citizens donate blankets and food to the army. Washington writes to Congress on January 5th, recounting his recent movements and explaining the hardships that his men are now facing, saying, "The militia are taking spirit and I am told are coming in fast from this state, but I fear those from Philadelphia will scarcely submit to the hardships of a winter campaign much longer, especially as they very unluckily sent their blankets with their baggage to Burlington. I must do them justice, however, to add that they have undergone more fatigue and hardship than I expected militia, especially citizens, would have done at this inclement season. I am just moving to Morristown, where I shall endeavor to put them under the best cover I can. Hitherto we have been without any, and many of our poor soldiers quite barefoot and ill-clad in other respects." In New York, change happens fast. On January 15th, a convention in Westminster declares independence from Britain and New York, forming the Republic of New Connecticut, a state we now know as Vermont. The delegates, led by Thomas Chittenden, seek to end land disputes with New York through this declaration, but Congress doesn't recognize the new state. In rural New Connecticut, families plow frozen fields, praying for peace to secure their claims. February arrives and the Second Continental Congress grapples with governance in Philadelphia. The costs of war are soaring, but no central tax system exists. Loans from France and Spain made through back channels prop up the war effort, alongside smuggled gunpowder and muskets through patriot ports like those in Boston. American paper money plummets in value. In Philadelphia, food costs 8 to 10 times what it did just years ago, so bartering becomes the predominant form of trade. Farmers trade their eggs for nails, weavers swap their cloth for merchants' salt, and town committees looking to stop the bleeding enforce price caps and seize large stockpiles of goods. March brings with it the spring planting season. Farmers sow wheat and rye, but still fear that armies will trample or plunder their yield. Both sides gear up for the more favorable fighting weather. British troops in New York push south to try and split New England from the Middle Colonies, while Washington, now increasing his enlistment efforts, bolsters defenses along the Hudson River, aiming to slow their advancement. The call for able-bodied fighters is both urgent and widespread, with even Quakers in Pennsylvania facing pressure to abandon pacifism. Some are fined or shunned from society for conscientiously objecting to militia duty. Even those not on the ever-changing front lines of this war, the conflict is taking its toll. On March 7th, Congressman John Adams in Philadelphia writes to his wife, Abigail, in Braintree, Massachusetts, though the mail takes weeks to arrive, if it ever does, due to the war and the winter. Adams writes, "When I reflect upon the prospect before me of so long an absence from all that I hold dear in this world, I mean all that contributes to my private, personal happiness, it makes me melancholy." Abigail responds, "I have heard oftener from you than I ever did in any of your former journeys. I rejoice so much when I only receive a few lines from you, just to hear you are well." I actually spent a lot of time reading John and Abigail's letters to each other. They discuss war, politics, gossip, and even exchange some jokes. It's massively humanizing to hear in their own words what it's like to live in this time. There's over 1,000 letters that are preserved, and there is a link to them on our X, 250 Years of USA, so you can read and enjoy some of the correspondence that this happy couple exchanges. On April 1st, John Morton of Pennsylvania, a signer of the Declaration, dies likely of tuberculosis at age 53. John Morton showed his fervor for independence in a letter written to a merchant in London dated June 8th of 1775. In this letter, he expresses not only his resolve for independence, but his concern for the coming war. "We are really preparing for the worst that can happen, viz., a civil war." He goes on to say, "I hope time will manifest to the world that a steady perseverance in the cause of freedom will triumph over all the deep-laid schemes of tyranny, and that Britain and America will again be united on the solid foundation of commerce and the Constitution." It fell upon John Morton to cast the deciding vote for Pennsylvania on the matter of independence, and he did so in July of last year. He returned to the State House on August 2nd to affix his name to the Declaration of Independence. Morton is the first of the signers to die and passes without ever knowing the outcome of the vicious fighting that his signing has sparked. British General John Burgoyne plans a Hudson River campaign from Canada to isolate New England. Hearing of this, the militias in New York and New Connecticut mobilize and head north to aid in the resistance. On April 20th, New York's convention in Kingston adopts its first constitution. It states, "The late most firm connection between Great Britain and these colonies hath become utterly inconsistent with the safety and welfare of this state." Their constitution forms 3 branches of governance: executive, legislative, and judicial, electing a governor and 24 senators by freeholders worth more than £100, or men who owned decent plots of land, and electing 70 assemblymen by all adult male residents. A right that was eroded under British rule, trial by jury, is once again guaranteed. New York City remains occupied, but this framework shapes governance for the Patriots. May heats up in Philadelphia as Congress debates funding and alliances. Secret letters to France seek aid, but the post is delayed by blockades and slow ships. Farmers work to double their crops for soldiers, and with less men to work the farms, it's not uncommon to see even the youngest capable children of farmers turned fighters working the fields. Small boys lead ox as they plow fields, and their sisters pull weeds and plant seeds. Despite the chaos in the background of everyday life, literacy thrives in New England as parents teach their children to read with pamphlets, letters, and notably a publication known as the New England Primer. In Virginia, slaves continue to hear whispers of British promises of freedom, and some flee south, while others sabotage tools or weapons in quiet acts of defiance. Newspapers spread war news, uniting patriots as they root for their brave fighting force. I've posted a few examples of newspapers from the time on our X as well, so check those out and let me know what you think. On May 16th, Georgia's Button Gwinnett, another Declaration signer, duels his political rival, Lachlan McIntosh, near Savannah. The 2 men represent opposing factions in a deeply divided patriot movement in Georgia. Gwinnett has recently secured election to the Provincial Congress and began purging the government and the military of his political rivals. McIntosh addressed the Georgia Assembly and denounced Gwinnett, calling him a scoundrel and lying rascal. Gwinnett then sends a written challenge to McIntosh demanding an apology or satisfaction. McIntosh refuses to apologize, so Gwinnett challenges him to a duel. In the duel, both are wounded, and Gwinnett dies 3 days later from gangrene, making him the second signer to die. George Washington actually gets word of this and fears that Gwinnett's allies will avenge his death, so he orders McIntosh to report to Continental Army headquarters, where he is enlisted and serves for the duration of the war. On May 23rd, Patriot troops raid Sag Harbor, New York. Led by Colonel Return Jonathan Meigs, 130 men use only their bayonets to capture a British commander at 2 a.m., opting for stealth over force. Eventually, they burn 12 supply ships and seize 90 prisoners, all with only one shot fired. The cunning and inventive tactics of the Patriots continue to surprise and confound the British, guerrilla attacks remaining the Patriots' best hope of inflicting meaningful damage. June begins, and on the 2nd, upon the suggestion of Thomas Young, the Republic of New Connecticut becomes Vermont, from the French, Les Vermonts, meaning simply Green Mountains. In the South, Loyalist raids disrupt life. Families are forced to either fortify their homes or flee them, and profiteers take advantage of the situation to hike up prices. On June 13th, Lafayette, a 19-year-old French aristocrat, lands in America, eager to aid Washington. Despite initial opposition from King Louis XVI of France, Lafayette is determined to fight for American ideals and liberty, and he soon heads to Philadelphia, the heart of the fledgling American government, where on the 14th, the Second Continental Congress gives America its first official flag, the Stars and Stripes. It's a big moment for a nation fighting to stand on its own, a simple step that pulls all 13 states together under one banner for the first time. 2 years to the day after the formation of the American Army, Congress carves out time in the hectic schedule to pass this resolution. Resolved, that the flag of the United States be 13 stripes, alternate red and white, and that the Union be 13 stars, white, in a blue field, representing a new constellation. It's a quick vote that slips through the day's grind, but it's a marker and a way to show the world that these states are one nation and not a scattered bunch of rebels or colonies. The rollout of this newly adopted flag is pretty slow. After the vote, Congress does not send a blueprint, and soldiers often make their own versions, usually off of sketches, if not verbal or written descriptions. The flags they stitch together have varying hues, varying proportions, and even align the stars differently, sometimes a scattering of stars, sometimes in lines or in a circle. Despite these minor differences, these flags fly in battles across the colonies, and for the Patriots, they are a unifying symbol of the, as of yet, unrealized ideas that they fight for. For the British, it signals a marked step towards American unification. A collective, revolutionary fighting force is much harder to defeat than isolated pockets of rebellious militias. Now, with this next portion, I hope to open up discussion, because legend credits Betsy Ross with the design, but the story doesn't exactly hold up. The only basis, as far as I can tell, for assuming that she had anything to do with the design is a claim made over 90 years from now, in 1870. The grandson of Betsy Ross, William Canby, tells the Historical Society of Pennsylvania that she met Washington in 1776 and switched his 6-pointed stars to 5 while sewing the first flag in her Philadelphia parlor. But there's no records of this, either official or personal, so it's likely the real story is that Francis Hopkinson, a signer of the Declaration of Independence, designed it, taking from earlier designs and refining it. From what I can gather, it also seems like the seamstresses tasked with crafting Patriot uniforms were commissioned with sewing the early versions of the Stars and Stripes together. If I'm missing something, and you know something I don't, I would love to have you get in contact with me, so you can send me a message on X, or make a post with the hashtag 250yearsofUSA, or just reach out directly by the email. Now, as we move into July, Vermont's convention in Windsor drafts its constitution. The proposed constitution mirrors the wording of the Declaration signed 1 year ago, saying, "All men are born equally free and independent, and have certain natural, inherent, and unalienable rights, amongst which are the enjoying and defending life and liberty, acquiring, possessing, and protecting property, and pursuing and obtaining happiness and safety." One part of this constitution that sets Vermont apart from the other and officially recognized colonies adds, No male person born in this country or brought from overseas ought to be holden by law to serve any person as a servant, slave, or apprentice after he arrives to the age of 21 years, nor female in like manner after she arrives to the age of 18 years, unless they are bound by their own consent. Slavery remains the norm for the 13 colonies, a holdover from the British system, but the outlawing of it in Vermont, at least for adults, marks the first ban of slavery in America. Two other notable parts of this Constitution is the article which gives all freemen the right to vote even if they own no property, and the inclusion of a line that, quote, "The people have a right to bear arms for the defense of themselves and the state." On July 4th of 1777, Philadelphia holds the first organized celebration of Independence Day. While there were certainly celebrations last year as people attended public readings of the Declaration that began popping up on the 8th, there was not a sanctioned Independence Day observed until now. The day begins with a 13-gun salute at sunrise, one for each of the colonies. The Continental Army's warships are decorated with streamers and proudly fly the newly adopted Stars and Stripes. They fire 13 shots from their cannons around midday, and finally by sunset, bells ring across Philadelphia. There is a fireworks display, which both begins and concludes with 13 rockets illuminating the sky. Similar celebrations take place in Boston, and the Virginia Gazette writes on July 5th, "May the 4th of July, that glorious and ever memorable day, be celebrated through America by the sons of freedom, from age to age till time shall be no more." Though the celebration is well earned, the enemy remains an ever-present threat. Also on July 5th, Burgoyne's 8,000 men still moving south from the safe haven of Canada recapture Fort Ticonderoga, which comes as a shock to the Patriots. Burgoyne's redcoats chase a retreating American rearguard composed of about 1,200 men under Colonel Seth Warner. They dig in on a wooded hill near Hubbardton Village after a grueling night, running away from the fort. At dawn, British Brigadier Simon Fraser hits them with 850 regulars. Patriots hold a defensible position on the higher ground and bayonets gleam as redcoats charge up the slope. For 2 hours, musket balls fly in both directions. Warner's men fire from behind rocks, holding ground until 400 Hessians flank them with disciplined tactics, firing and reloading in concert with their fellow fighters. The Patriots make a break for it. In the end, 150 are dead or wounded, and 350 scatter into the forest, while British forces also take about 200 casualties. The same day as this battle in Hubbardton, Vermont's constitution is adopted as the law of the land, while Vermont remains officially unrecognized as one of the United States by Congress, who see it as a part of New York. On July 27th, Lafayette finally reaches Philadelphia. His 600-mile trek from South Carolina has taken 6 weeks, bouncing over rutted roads in a carriage he borrowed. He meets Congress in the State House and offers them his sword. On July 31st, they name him as Major General, though the title is honorary for now, and he has no men at his command. He has made a show of his support for the Americans, and this aristocrat, arriving in the wartime capital of Philadelphia, a tall, red-haired Frenchman dressed in a blue coat and adorned in gold jewelry, gives Americans a much-celebrated visual reminder of their allies abroad. In western New York, on August 6th, General Nicholas Herkimer leads 800 Patriot militiamen, along with some Oneida Indians, towards Fort Schuyler to break a British siege. Ignoring Herkimer's cautious plan to wait for a signal from the fort, his officers push for an immediate advance. Unknown to them, there's an ambush waiting for them in the ravine. There is a force of some 700 Loyalists and allied Iroquois Indians under the command of John Johnson and Joseph Brant laying in wait as the militia descends into the ravine. They are attacked and the advance guard is overwhelmed. Herkimer, though wounded, continues directing the fight, and intense hand-to-hand combat ensues. Luckily for the Patriots, a thunderstorm temporarily halts the battle, giving them a chance to regroup. When the fighting resumes, the native forces begin suffering heavy losses and start to withdraw, eventually leading to a full Loyalist retreat. Though the militia fails to reach the fort and suffers some 465 casualties, the chaotic battle creates somewhat of a rift between the Indians and the Loyalists. And this battle is known as being one of the only major battles of the Revolution to take place in America where all the fighters are from North America. On August the 11th, we find Lafayette at Neshaminy Creek in Pennsylvania. Washington hosts him at the Army camp, 20 miles north of Philadelphia. The Army's 11,000 men camp in tents, battered but holding out, and Lafayette joins their drills. Lafayette's earnest enthusiasm and willingness to mingle earns him the respect of the grizzled troops and reminds them of their international support. Across the United States, Native peoples are not uniform in their support for the Revolution, and most choose to remain neutral. The Iroquois Confederacy, an alliance of 6 indigenous nations in New York, is fractured by the war and varying allegiances. As we touched on briefly at the Battle of Fort Schuyler, the Oneida and the Tuscarora nations largely side with the American patriots, providing support through food and able-bodied fighters and scouts. The Oneida specifically play a large part in reconnaissance, gathering information on troop movements, and serve as knowledgeable guides helping the Continental Army forage for food to supplement their meager rations. The Mohawk, Seneca, Cayuga, and Onondaga nations, however, largely ally with the British. The Cherokee Nation, one of the largest Native American tribes in the South, also largely sides with the British, hoping they will, in the event of victory, protect their land from further settlement and honor the King's proclamation line. The Cherokee also see the worst of American slavery in their region and fear a similar treatment from the Americans should the Patriots take independent control of the government. As we continue through August, the first cracks appear for Burgoyne's campaign. As his men move south as part of the overall strategy of dividing New England, they're slowed by poor roads. Trees and other obstacles placed by the Americans clog up these pathways, and the supply line is stretched thin from the successful Patriot attacks. As Baum and his men move southeast, local militia units learn of his activity and prepare for action as Loyalists rush to aid the British detachment. After some heavy fighting, American forces are able to breach their enemy's hastily constructed defenses. For some fighters, the fight is personal, and for all, it's desperate. Former friends who have grown up together in Vermont or the surrounding area likely find themselves facing off with each other as they are fighting for their lives. Within this short but explosive battle, Patriot forces have Baum and his men surrounded. Baum himself is mortally wounded in the battle, and many of his Indian and Loyalist allies flee. The battle finally ends at nightfall, and Baum's reinforcements arrive late, discovering the bodies of 200 dead British fighters laying in the mud beside the wounded and dying. The defeat puts a major and unexpected strain on Burgoyne's army, which, in addition to the 900 casualties, never secures the provisions the British commander had sent them to get in the first place. The Indian allies largely lose confidence in Burgoyne and his mission, and leave the army to fend for itself in the New York wilderness without their best guides. On September 11th, General George Washington is determined to prevent the British from capturing the American seat of government in Philadelphia. He orders his men to take up positions along Brandywine Creek. Washington mistakenly believes that his carefully positioned army of 11,000 is blocking all crossings across the Brandywine. William Howe and an army of over 15,000 British regulars and Hessian troops, hidden by heavy fog, move into position around the city undetected. One British detachment is ordered to demonstrate against the Americans at Chad's Ford as a distraction, while the bulk of Howe's forces cross the Brandywine further upstream. The battle at Chadds Ford has been raging for hours by the time Howe's force appears on the right flank of Washington's men, and despite putting up a stiff resistance, the Continental Army is eventually overrun by Howe's men, and Washington's line collapses. 25 miles southwest of Philadelphia, Lafayette rides with General John Sullivan's division as the British ford the water, and he takes a musket ball to the thigh, though stays in the saddle, rallying men until blood soaks his boot. To prevent the defeat turning into disaster, Washington orders a rear guard to aid escape to the northeast. The brave men counterattack, going toe-to-toe with British along the crest of Birmingham Hill, and when night falls, the remaining Americans retreat, led in part by the now wounded Lafayette. The Battle of Brandywine is the largest single-day engagement of the Revolution, and the crushing defeat allows the British to occupy Philadelphia, and results in 1,300 American casualties. Patriots, including those serving in Congress, flee to Lancaster. Important military supplies are moved out of the Philadelphia area to Reading, where they can be more easily defended. The loss of Philadelphia hurts the Patriot cause, and Washington's force again bleeds troops who abandon the fight and return home to their families. Meanwhile, in New York, Burgoyne's reduced forces march south towards Saratoga, where General Horatio Gates is ready with some 8,500 men to disrupt the Brits' advance. The Americans erect a fortified wall extending about 3/4 of a mile, creating an L-shaped line. 22 cannons are placed behind this defense, and Gates' troops station defenses on a series of bluffs from which they can see both the Hudson River and the road they expect the British to use, providing the Americans with ample artillery cover. Burgoyne's 6,000 and Gates' 8,500 clash on September 19th at Freeman's Farm, and after 5 hours of brutal fighting, 550 British and 280 Americans lie dead. Burgoyne's battered forces dig trenches and wait for reinforcements, now in a standoff with the Americans. Meanwhile, on September 20th, near Paoli, Pennsylvania, one of the most infamous events of the American Revolution takes place. General Charles Gray's 5,000 men surreptitiously move through the woods surrounding an American encampment. They attack and stealthily bayonet 272 sleeping Patriots, killing 53 in the Paoli Massacre. Tales of this attack are told far and wide in an effort to portray the British as butchers and dishonorable fighters, deepening division and encouraging even more vigorous fighting from the angry Americans. On September 30th, after meeting for only one day at Lancaster, Congress arrives in New York, where the Susquehanna River is between them and the enemy. Congress has foiled Howe's plan for a crushing defeat by moving out of Philadelphia before its capture. For now, their meetings take place in the county courthouse as they continue to make plans and lead in the revolutionary movement. October shifts momentum and brings with it the first real tinges of winter in the North. On October 4th, Washington's 11,000 attack Howe's 9,000 at Germantown, but fog foils the plan and 152 Patriots die, another 521 wounded. 400 men are captured and later sent to British prison ships. Britain gets out of the battle with half as many dead, and Washington retreats, but his resolve is unrelenting. Now we head back to Saratoga, where Burgoyne and his men have been waiting for over 2 weeks for reinforcements that still have not arrived. Howe, before moving with his men to Philadelphia, has left General Henry Clinton in charge of New York's defense with instructions to assist Burgoyne if the chance should arise. Clinton then sailed up the Hudson River with 3,000 men last week and captured 2 Patriot forts. These attacks were meant to pull the American forces under General Gates off of Saratoga and allow Burgoyne to continue his southern advance, but Gates remained on Bemis Heights. Unlike the British forces, Gates' army has increased by the day. Patriotic locals who have heard of the prolonged battle join the cause. At first a trickle, but now a deluge. Caught unprepared, the British at Saratoga plan to launch a second attack on the Americans, knowing their situation will only get worse and desperate to get out of the position they're pinned down in. On October 7th, Burgoyne launches a desperate last push. His 6,000 British Hessians and Loyalists camped near Saratoga Village faced General Horatio Gates and his men, who remained fortified at Bemis Heights. At 2 p.m., 1,500 Redcoats probe the Americans from the left, and while Gates holds back, General Benedict Arnold defies orders and charges out with 3,000 men. Muskets blaze on Freeman's Farm, and Arnold's men shred the British line. By dusk, 600 Redcoats lay dead or wounded, 3 times the Patriot casualties. Burgoyne orders retreat, and his men, still bleeding, seek shelter once again. Burgoyne still hopes for aid from General Henry Clinton, but him and his men are over 100 miles south. Clinton's 2,000 start up the Hudson, but stall as Gates tightens the noose, his militia now swelling to 15,000 as New Englanders keep pouring in. By October 13th, 15,000 Patriots surround Burgoyne's 5,700 at Saratoga. Gates has successfully cut off food and water, and there are cannons pounding their lines. On the 17th, Burgoyne surrenders, saying, "The fortune of war, General Gates, has made me your prisoner." This moment was a massive win for all who were rooting for the Americans. The surrender of thousands of British fighters to the Patriots was for many a portent of things to come should Americans keep their resolve and hold dear to the spirit of 1776. The 5,000 defeated men march out at 3 p.m. having lost the battle, but holding on to their lives, unlike the 1,000 men buried that they leave behind. They stack their arms near the Hudson as Gates watches. There's quite a famous portrait of Burgoyne's surrendering to Gates that's posted on our X today, and this victory is noted around the world. France is reassured by the Americans' courage, and the alliance that was made is now cemented. Even some politicians in Britain take note, now beginning to question if the victory they seek is going to be as assured as they once felt it was. For over a year now, there has remained in Congress and even in the ranks of the Continental Army a dissentious attitude towards Washington's leadership. Charles Lee was an early critic and saw himself as an apt replacement, though he is now being held as a prisoner of war by the British after being captured at Widow's White Tavern last year. General Thomas Conway, an Irish-born Frenchman, now leads the charge. After the success in Saratoga, he speaks sharply, calling Washington weak compared to General Horatio Gates. Conway is not alone. General Thomas Mifflin and a handful in Congress, such as James Lovell, begin whispering Gates should take over for Washington. On November 4th, Washington learns of a letter Thomas Conway wrote to Gates in which he said, "Heaven has been determined to save your country, or a weak general and bad counselors would have ruined it." Though clearly an imperfect man, and his complicated plans often not working out as intended, Washington is viewed positively by most, and the murmurings of his incompetence are largely rejected. Okay, meanwhile, in Philadelphia, the Second Continental Congress hammers out a plan to hold this young nation together, the Articles of Confederation. On June 11th last year, Congress appointed a committee to prepare and digest the form of a confederation. The spiritual successor to this idea was back in 1754, when Benjamin Franklin floated a rough idea at the Albany Congress for the colonies to join forces, manage trade, and face threats as one. It flopped back then, but the influence of the Albany Plan of Union is clear in these Articles of Confederation. That 54 plan had proposed a colonial president/general appointed by the Crown and a Grand Council composed of representatives from each colony, elected by their respective assemblies who would have the power to levy taxes, enlist troops, and regulate trade. The crafting of this form of confederation started nearly as soon as it was commissioned last year, but has been dragging. Congress is still giving a majority of its focus to winning the war, and was recently disrupted by the fall of Philadelphia. The debate, however, has been going on about how much power should go to Congress and how much should stay with the states. Richard Henry Lee has been advocating for states to continue to hold the reins. Too much control up top reminds him of British rule and monarchy. while Massachusetts' John Adams pushes back as he wants a tighter knot to hold the war effort together. After over a year of editing and debating the Articles of Confederation, the congressional vote lands on November 15th, a hard-won step forward. Congress sits in York now, 80 miles west of Philadelphia. 41 delegates from 12 states fill a borrowed courthouse. John Hancock calls the roll, and the final draft is read and approved. I definitely believe it's worth a read or at least a listen, but it takes about 20 minutes to listen to, so I've opted to post it separately instead of include it in this already long episode. So you can check out the full reading of the Articles of Confederation on our Rumble or YouTube today. The Articles of Confederation give Congress war powers, state dispute rights, and loan authority. No control over taxes, however, keeping states in charge of their financial success or failure. 10 states say yes: Massachusetts, Virginia, Pennsylvania, New Hampshire, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, Connecticut, New York, North and South Carolina all sign the articles to indicate that their states have ratified them. Maryland's Thomas Johnson says that he will refuse until Virginia cedes its western lands. Only 2 delegates show up from Delaware, and they have not yet internally resolved their issues with the articles, and Georgia is missing entirely, as no representatives make the trek north to York. Congress officially adopts the Articles of Confederation on November 15th, though the full ratification awaits. From this meeting in York, a weak but arguably necessary central government emerges as the framework is implemented, marking a significant step towards national cohesion. Across the states, daily life grinds on, and this winter is shaping up to be an especially harsh one. Farmers preserve what foods they can, fearing shortages. Anxious families across the nation prepare their homes and barns for winter, praying they have done enough to weather the bitter cold now sinking in. Across America, faith holds strong, with Sunday sermons urging perseverance despite the chaos. If you remember, most signers of the Declaration of Independence were committed Christians, but notably, despite his support of the Bible, Benjamin Franklin did not consider himself Christian. And Thomas Paine, who played a pivotal role in tipping the scales of public opinion in favor of the revolution, as we discussed in the last episode, was not only not a Christian, but was actually critical of the Christian faith. However, many Revolutionary War clergymen argue that the war against Britain is approved by God. As the year draws to an end, Abraham Keteltis makes a now famous sermon, saying, "The cause of truth against error and falsehood, the cause of pure and undefiled religion against bigotry, superstition, and human invention. In short, it is the cause of heaven against hell, of the kind parent of the universe against the prince of darkness and the destroyer of the human race." In his sermon, he also more directly links tyranny to Satan, saying, "I lay down this maxim of divinity. Tyranny, being a work of Satan, is not from God, because sin, either habitual or actual, is not from God." This is a double-edged sword, of course. Many British fighters at the time also believed themselves to be fighting not just for king and country, but also for God. Whether it is God or good luck, we of course know how this war will go, and no matter what your beliefs, it's hard to deny how fateful and serendipitous many of the early American decisions are at shaping our nation. Back to the war. We now come to the final major military engagement of the year. General William Howe leads a sizable contingent of troops out of Philadelphia in one last attempt to destroy Washington and the Continental Army before the onset of winter. The Continental Army, encamped for the last month at White Marsh, 13 miles northwest of Philadelphia, is waiting for an attack that Washington's spies have assured him is coming. As the ragged soldiers try and sleep at this camp in the heavily wooded hills, they are in an ugly mood. They are cold, hungry, and tired. They haven't been paid since late summer. With his customary desire to see things for himself, Washington has left his headquarters to scout the British defenses of Philadelphia. He later says of them that they are much stronger than I had reason to expect for the accounting I had received. On December 4th, Howe marches nearly his entire army, about 12,000 British and German troops, out of Philadelphia. On this bitterly cold night, he leaves only 3,000 troops behind. Knowing that an attack to reclaim Philadelphia is out of the question, Washington is actually pleasantly surprised to hear that Howe is leading his men right towards him. When they show up just outside Chestnut Hill in the pre-dawn hours, the Americans are about 15,000 strong, including reinforcements from Gates' army, and are awake and waiting for them. Howe is denied any opening for an attack during 3 days of maneuvering, as his troops keep about a mile away and keep probing for a weak spot. Despite skirmishes, no full-scale battle develops, and frustrated by Washington's refusal to emerge from his entrenchments, Howe leads his British columns back to their winter abode in Philadelphia, while Washington moves his army shortly thereafter toward Valley Forge. On December 17th, French diplomat Charles Gravier officially recognizes the United States. He's likely encouraged to do so by the news of Saratoga reaching France and Franklin's charm in Paris, a victory that will become even clearer next year. But back to Valley Forge. On the 19th, Washington's 12,000 men reach Valley Forge and prepare their winter camp. It's here that the Continental Army hunkers down for a winter that will test their resolve. Cold and hunger grips all the men camped here. For now, it's not a battle of muskets and cannons, but a fight against despair. Howe's 15,000 redcoats sit snug in Philadelphia, but Washington picks this spot, high ground flanked by a river, for defense, not for comfort. Snow soaks the ragged coats of these tired fighters. About a quarter lack shoes and wrap their feet in burlap. Supplies seem to just vanish, and frostbite claims toes, feet, and fingers. Soldiers chop oaks and pines, and hundreds of log huts start taking shape, generally no more than 12 by 16 feet, each one providing just enough room for 12 men to pack in shoulder to shoulder. By the end of the month, hunger gnaws at the men as they boil shoe leather to soften it enough to eat, and some 200 die of starvation and cold before the year's end. Smallpox creeps in too, and doctors are called in to inoculate hundreds, pricking arms with infected pus to save lives, a grim necessity amidst the chill. On the final day in 1777, December 31st, Washington tells Lafayette, "I shall continue to observe one steady and uniform conduct, which I shall invariably pursue while I have the honor to command, regardless of the tongue of slander or the powers of detraction." Furthermore, he tells the press that if Congress could find someone better suited to lead the army, that he would be more than happy to resign and return to private life at his Mount Vernon estate. Though in a horrible state, the Continental Army does what's best for the American people and for the pursuit of liberty, staying put and forging on. Washington is aware of the criticism his leadership has been receiving, and remains steadfast in his determination to fight for freedom, no matter where this war leads him or his men. Well, that's where we leave our brave soldiers this time. As 1777 ends, war scars daily life. Shortages, loss, and cold tests everybody, yet the American spirit remains unbroken. Check our X at 250 Years of USA for portraits depicting events we covered today, documents from the time, and don't forget to check out that reading of the Articles of Confederation, and keep the conversation going. Drop us a line, tell me what you think, what we missed, what you learned, or anything that we got wrong. Share the show with all your friends, and be sure to follow us to get tomorrow's episode in your feed. Next time, in 1778, Valley Forge continues to test Washington's men. France makes a pledge. Alliances shift, and we head west. Thanks for joining me in 1777. This has been our story, 250 years of the United States of America. And as always, thank you for listening.